Welcome everyone to our panel here on Testing-Centric culture. My name is Marielle Hubble. I'm the Senior Manager for Analytics and Optimization at Souther. So I'm particularly interested in this panel, and the panelists are wonderful, very experienced businessmen. I'm excited to be the only woman on the stage, so it's like always good to represent. So I'm going to let you guys introduce each other. We have, as I said, great panelists. I think we'll have lots to talk about. We have about 15 minutes, and I want to give you guys the opportunity to ask questions. Whenever you want to, if something is on top of your mind and you want to say it right out, do so. And if not, we'll have about 5 or 10 minutes at the end to give you an opportunity to ask questions. Why don't we start with you, Adam?
Hi. My name is Adam Schwartz. I am the COO and co-founder of BustedTees and TeePublic.
Great. Oh, I'm up. All right. My name is Rob Schutz. I'm the head of growth at Bark & Co. We do all things related to dogs.
And he was planning on coming in a dog costume, but it's apparently stuck at the dry cleaner.
Hi, I'm Aaron Magnus. I'm CMO at Betabrand, run everything marketing and revenue related.
I'm Jason Abruzzi. I'm a business reporter at Mashable, covering primarily media.
Cool. So to start, I'm going to start with you, Adam, because you sit closest. Some of the questions that we all kind of worked on together was kind of talking about how you have actually created a testing-centric culture at your business, and kind of like what it means to you on a day-to-day business, and what perspective. And what we had talked about as all of the panelists together was that we wanted this panel to be very relevant and very tactical and give lots of examples. So I'm hoping you guys are fulfilling that.
Yeah, sure. So, the first thing is, we bought BustedTees back from IAC in 2011, to whom we'd sold it. And when we did that, it was sort of like taking over a distressed asset to some extent, and we sort of needed to change the culture up and down. But the first thing that I really wanted to do was create a culture that was data-driven, create a culture that was test-driven. And so, we sort of had to do that in two ways. I mean, one way was we had to sort of readjust everybody and their role, whether it was somebody, on the phones in customer service, the development team, the design team, to understand that there would be multiple versions of every single thing that they did from now on, and that there would be no more decisions that would be acceptable that would be made by, I thought we should do this, I think we should do this, I have a hunch that we should do this. It's just, we're throwing that out. Like, there's going to be a right answer, and we're going to get to it. And the second thing, that I think is much more difficult than sort of a cultural change, is getting the plumbing right. And I mean, I'm pretty positive I'm going to say this again throughout this panel, but if you want to have a testing-centric culture, it's probably going to take you 6 months to a year just to get the plumbing right, honestly. It's very, very difficult, but whatever it is, whatever the product is, what the software, an e-commerce platform, whatever, it takes a tremendous amount of effort, just as much effort almost as it does to build a piece of software in the first place, to build an infrastructure of data so that whatever you do in the future, the correct data is going to be there, the KPI that whatever the test was going against is going to exist, and it's going to be quality, and you're going to trust it. Because if you can't trust the data, if you're not 100% certain that this data is good, it's always going to be this like, well, the data says this, but we don't really know if that's real or not. I don't think that the rest of the team, from a cultural standpoint, then will buy in. So you have to get the plumbing right, in order to really do it. And so that takes a lot of time, but obviously I think it's well worth it.
Yeah, something that we heard yesterday from David from Acumen was that every team had their own tools that they were measuring their success by. And that, to your point, if someone says, but my tool tells me this is what we accomplished, and the other department doesn't have faith in that result, then the whole approach is essentially going to waste. Anyone want to talk a little about their own day-to-day in terms of how to create that culture?
Sure. I guess we'll just go in order here.
Yeah.
So yeah, with Barkbox, testing has always been a big part of what we do, and really important, especially when we were starting out, before we knew if people even like dogs. They do, as it turns out. But I'll kind of approach this question more from like an acquisition and channel standpoint. So initially it was very much about how do we test in a very lean manner, not put too much time and money into like testing a paid channel, if it's testing on Facebook or testing with like cost per lead campaigns, whatever it may be. And also testing in a way where you can kind of do it on your own and not need to pull in resources from across a bunch of different teams. Because you kind of wear down your own, I guess, personal capital when you ask like, hey design, can you help me with this? Or hey dev, can you build this functionality? And then it winds up tanking. You've kind of hurt yourself the next time around. So finding ways to be really nimble and test on channels allowed us to kind of find a couple winners off the bat. Unsurprisingly, channels where we could show pictures or videos of dogs did well and add a call to action to it. So kind of teasing that out, but then the next step of how do we get really good about collecting leads on site? How do we optimize signups for emails, and then testing kind of our drip email campaigns, the follow-ups, the welcomes to those guys, to understand what gets people to actually convert and buy. And it turns out pictures of sad dogs work very well. This is your dog if you don't buy him or her a Barkbox. That was what my dog was primarily good for, because he looks sad all the time. But yeah, just really taking a testing mentality, and as Adam said, you don't want to rely on like, here's what I think will work, or here's what my friend told me will work. Like, you have to test it and prove it out, and then once you have the data, you can make a much stronger case organizationally, and again, you kind of maintain your credibility for next time you want to take a chance.
Aaron, something that you had told us in the pre-conversations that we had was that there's this crux between this is your brand and this is what you want to create, and then this is what the data tells you. So what if the data tells you something that's actually against what you want to be as a brand? And I think that's one of the examples that you had brought up. So if you want to speak a little bit to that.
So has anyone heard of Betabrand? I'm going to assume no. Anyone? Oh, great. Thank you all. Fantastic. You should buy all the things. So we're a crowdsourced apparel company, and then we crowdfund those to life. So from a retail perspective, it's de-risked, and then from a consumer perspective, hopefully it's very participatory. And in doing that, we've sort of built this brand that relies a lot on imagery and testing a lot of iterations on what's the right fabric people want, what's the right call to action, what's the right thing. So testing has sort of been part and parcel to how we approach things. And then as we grow and scale, it's always changing, the new tests and the new trial. And one of the things that we have been up against is, historically, like I said, and even to today, imagery is a big deal. And how do we use images to emote passion and engagement, things like that. And we started doing tests of, if a product goes from voting to crowdfunding, what's the best way to let those voters know? And of course, it was always, show them a big, beautiful picture of the, product that they had voted on, and of course they want to buy it. And as we tested to just very literal, stark contrast, plain text with like a single blue link, like, you're getting something from someone on a Hotmail account in '99. So that's what we tested, and what we found is it like blew away our actual tried and true approach to announcements, and some like 500% or click-through rate increase, 30% revenue increase. And then we're like, well, what does this mean for us? Like, we're not gonna just throw away, our whole brand just so we can get people to click through. So that's the type of thing where we think through, well, what are the key learnings from this test? What are the buckets that we can put it in that will show success and keep those folks engaged, but at the same time, not really dumb down or bastardize the brand in a way that is gonna have a negative long-term effect. So big component of what does testing mean? Well, how do you engage people? How do you entice people? But also how do you do that in a way that keeps the brand healthy for the long term? That's where we balance the art and science of the results of these type of tests. And I will start using sad dogs.
Perfect.
Yeah, so Jason is joining us from the publishing side, and we talked yesterday about kind of like my first question to you was like, who's the publisher out there who, everyone's like aspiring to be, or who's like the most data-driven essentially out there? And I'd love if you could speak a little bit more.
And don't tell my bosses I said this, but it's BuzzFeed. It's not even close. I mean, when it was founded by a person who kind of said like, let's use kind of this testing-centric, data-driven, very results-heavy model to be a publisher. And that has obviously worked out pretty well for them. They are now maybe the biggest online publisher, definitely the biggest social publisher, and that's because they just constantly everything they publish is a test in and of itself, because they are tracking how did this perform, where did it perform well, who did it perform well with. Okay, how can we replicate that? How can we iterate upon that? And now they're starting to do it in video, and they went from 0 to one of the largest online video operations to date, and I mean that's just entirely through testing and being very data driven.
Yeah, and then as you work for Mashable, then internally is this. I always think as a journalist, as someone who wants to write and be like investigatory and and then suddenly someone tells you to write these 10 things you like, and then how is this internally a conflict within the team when you try to be more data driven as a company, but then you have this editorial team which is very personal about what the stories and everything that they tell.
Sure, it's interesting because depending on the publication, they're going to use the data differently. Like the New York Times is using data very differently from BuzzFeed. The New York Times is using data more to figure out the best way to find subscribers, not necessarily to figure out the best content. Like the New York Times' editorial operation, I mean, I'm sure that they have some data considerations, but the people I talked to there are basically saying, so Facebook Instant Articles is rolling out big today. Today is evidently the day that it's going to everybody. New York Times is on that, and you think well, that doesn't make sense with a paywall model. But it does if you're using that to figure out, okay, we can push this out. What stories are we then converting more readers into subscribers with it? Is it our big feature stories? Is it our breaking news? Is it our sports stories? That's obviously a very different data usage than BuzzFeed. So every newsroom is going to be a little different. Like the way we use it is to kind of predict which of our stories that we publish is going to do really well. Like we have people who work at Mashable who just work on this predictive algorithm and visualizing how things are being shared and where it's going big. And so our editorial guidance is a bit of a combination between what we think needs to be covered and what we think is important to our readers, and also immediate feedback of how our readers are sharing it and if that story is going to be big or not, and if that means, okay, let's put it on Facebook, let's really get it out to our social distribution channels. Yeah.
Great. Rob, you mentioned earlier that the majority of the testing is still done around the acquisition and the channel mix there. Do you see that shifting more towards retention? It's a lot that we talk about here yesterday and today. Is that something that you're planning on doing more so at Barkbox as well, or? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, being a subscription service, it's really important that we focus on retention, because once we've paid to acquire a user, keeping them on board is part of the recurring revenue model. So we have folks on the team who are just dedicated to retention and to understanding that flow, why people have canceled, if they're unhappy, what the trends are, how do we merchandise differently to kind of account for what people are saying, and then how do we also incentivize people to stay on board. So example is, some people have dogs that tear apart plush toys, and they get really frustrated when they keep getting plush toys, and so they'll put it in their comments, and then they don't see any different product the next month, and so they're like, I'm out of here. My dog destroys this in 5 minutes. Other people have dogs that love plush toys, but also destroy them in 5 minutes. So you have, there's not a one single size fits all case for these guys, because some people are like, man, my dog destroyed it in 3 minutes this month. This was the best month ever. It's so much fun to watch my dog destroy this toy. And other people are like, this is a cheap toy, and I feel like you're not giving me high quality. So we've worked, we have what we call a heavy chewer box now, which we prompt people for less, and we more opt them into once we see what their NPS, what their Net Promoter Score looks like, and what their renewal rates look like. So we try and do a combination of prompting the user to give us feedback, but also inferring based on how they rank individual products and if they're referring friends or if they renew.
Cool. Aaron, you talked about that same kind of shift more towards retention. How's it going? You switched to Souther, I think six months ago?
Yeah, well,
4 months ago?
June-ish. So, I think for us, we've got it all figured out. But the few things that we don't have figured out is, it's definitely around, I think a lot of startups really have the sole focus of acquisition. And I think, more people need to think about retention sooner. One thing for us is, how does acquisition look when you are becoming more effective at email marketing? And that's an area where we're at historically. Not that long ago, I'd say, less than 12 months ago, everyone in our newsletter got the exact same email every single send. And then we got super smart and we split it by male and female. And it was pretty amazing. And then now, since using Seltzer, we're getting definitely a lot better. We definitely balance it. Anyone saw the last panel talking about, I think from the Blaze out in the other room, what's the trade-off? As a brand, we want to make sure people know we're releasing new clothing products every single day. So part of the brand story is letting people know there's always something new, which if I really shrink that down to focus the audience, they're not going to see all the new things. So if you're thinking about brand advertisement versus a direct response, so how do you blend the two together? But one of the things that it has done, since we are getting better at converting folks from email subscribers to actual purchasers, we can spend more energy on the front end on lead gen, which historically we were very focused. I need you to click on this and make a purchase today. If not, you're dead to me. And that has allowed us to be a little more friendly in our approach and our onboarding. And then also from, folks that have, very limited, I'm sure I'm the only one in here with a very limited marketing budget. But, as we think through, it's a lot cheaper to get a lead than it is to really, back it out to conversion. So as we're getting more intelligent with getting those folks through the purchase funnel from engagement on the onboarding, I can actually allow my budget to stretch more by focusing on email capture and then converting them a little bit later.
Yep. Adam, so you said when you started in the beginning that every decision is based on data. Is that really true?
No. I think I meant that, any decision that is sort of an inflection point, and you can usually tell when the team starts, where there's a divide and people start, not even necessarily arguing, but debating about, a different course of action or whatever, that that the answer to that is always, then we're just going to test it. I mean, it's certainly not possible for everything to be tested. I don't think it's practical for everything to be tested. But anything that is sort of, I think, fundamental to the strategy of the business, that is sort of, a left or a right in terms of where we're going to go, is tested. And sort of back to what I was saying in my first comment, the more infrastructure that you've built to allow yourself to test, either how you're running A/B tests on ads or on retention or whatever, and how that data is flowing into your database, and how that is flowing into your marketers, whether it's exports or a dashboard or whatever, then the more realistic it becomes for everything to be tested. And so we test a lot. I mean, certainly anything on the retention side, anything that is, once somebody is a customer, what are we doing with them in terms of email, in terms of retargeting, in terms of messages? I mean, which is to say stuff that's very repeatable and static. Mm-hmm. It's that we test forever. I mean, it's really the acquisition stuff that's sort of changing week to week in terms of this is the offer and this is the creative and this is, that stuff is, we're testing it to the extent that we can, but it's actually much more difficult. It's the retention side where we test the most, and I think we've gotten the most bang for our buck.
So does everyone here kind of do you all measure against customer lifetime value? Is that kind of the key metric that, not maybe Jason as much, but in commerce, is that something that it's hard to measure, I think. It's hard to measure any test that you do against customer lifetime value, but I assume it's the ultimate metric that we're looking to optimize.
I mean, for us to just echo your point, I think we are not the most, I'll say savvy. So far, we're currently setting up all the tools so that we have a true north to go after, and that's part of the issue. When I'm, pulling data sets from 5 different partner solutions, that makes it kind of tough. So that's where our current focus is. Not as a sales pitch, but we definitely use sell-through a lot for a backbone of a lot of that. But that's going to be key, and that's where we started to see, well, we can look at all these other things, but if I don't have full confidence in either the data set is legit or very strong, I can't really rely on those tests as much as I would like to. So that's where we're trying to tackle it.
Yeah, and I actually think that's an interesting point from a publisher perspective too, because I don't think we're testing on content as much for lifetime value, but we are testing on advertising and advertising, formats and pop-ups and what is, if I put this up, how obnoxious can I be, but you'll still come back to the site? I mean, unfortunately, that's the bottom line for a lot of advertisers right now, because advertising rates online have gotten very, very low, especially for just regular display. So most sites you go to are going to have some sort of pre-roll that pops up in your face. We actually just started one that I think you're going to get one a day. But I mean, every time I go to a Gawker site, anytime I go to a Forbes site, there's these pop-ups. And I think that like the media publishing world is getting a little better at figuring out, all right, I need repeat visitors, because repeat visitors are really the people I can sell to my advertisers. Like otherwise, I'm not going to be able to convince anybody my brand's worth anything. Mm-hmm. How many of these things can I put up? What kind of things are going to be visible for an advertiser, but also not terrible for and that's really trying to triangulate a few different data points. And I think media publishers are just starting to turn this on.
Interesting. Do you think that shift towards content is coming? Because is that something where you see like lots of opportunities in optimizing for content in terms of recommendations?
It's tough. I think that you end up getting very iterative very fast. So like BuzzFeed's a great example because they're so good at this. They came out with one of those videos that was like people eating foods that they'd never heard of or something like that, or weird foods, and it was a hit. And basically they saw it was a hit, and they saw it resonated with this age group and things like this. We can make 15 more of these, which is great. And all those videos are actually pretty funny. At the same time, content is also very tough to automate in that sort of way. So there is an opportunity there, but I think you can't sell the whole farm to it.
Cool. Talking about content, I know you guys have Bark Posts, so you have the content arm. That's like something that I think we've heard a lot recently. E-commerce clients merging into content, publishers merging into commerce. Is that something that you guys are thinking about testing? Is that something that is a strategy that you're planning on investing more in? How is it going for you guys, the Bark Post, and how is it combining the two together?
It's going well.
Yeah.
I think we're probably in a slightly different boat in that we kind of started Bark Post, which is our content site, as the blog, like a complement to what we were doing on the commerce side. But what we found is that it's really exploded over the last year and a half, and Bark Post is now really its own entity. So we have Barkbox, which is monthly box treats and toys. Bark Post now has a team of about 30 people.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So editorial, we have a bunch of video staff that's joined recently, and then sales and sales support. So we found that there's a real appetite for big brands and advertisers wanting to get in front of like the dog parent audience. So we work with really big kind of like dog friendly brands that are not necessarily like dog food or dog treats. So we're working on a big campaign with Subaru right now. Did some stuff with Budweiser over the Super Bowl when they ran their like missing puppy campaign. So we're finding there's a really nice appetite for that. And then it's nice that we can sustain that business with some advertising and also use it for lead generation on the commerce side as well. Great to have that type of property at your disposal, but much harder to kind of substantiate the level of spend that goes into that unless you can, sell a bunch of merchandise or get sponsors to help prop that up somewhat.
Cool. Another question that I had was kind of like, how has the business changed in terms of hiring? Because I think suddenly everyone's craving for data scientists, and everyone's looking to have these, number crunchers and quant people in their teams.
Do you know any?
Ton.
Okay, great.
How is that? Is that hard? Are you training existing employees to be more data driven? Kind of like how's that effort going?
For us, it's a key hire. My first hire on the e-com team was an analyst. We're in the process of data science. Again, part of it, there's so much information out there. Building the right tools, I think, takes a really smart person that is probably hard to groom internally. And the people who can figure out the arbitrage moment first are the ones that win, and I think that's where the key is. And for a brand like us that is, creating product, if I know she likes she and people like her like a black sweater, well, what do women who wear black sweaters also wear? And then we actually have the ability to then go create that product. So all those tells, and then also, if within 24 hours of crowdfunding a product, I have a pretty good sense if it'll be successful or not. But when I need to make that inventory buy, how confident am I in that actual cut ticket? And then that's the type of thing that I think data plays into every single bit of the puzzle. And I think, brands, we all need to get smarter at.
How about you, Adam?
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, or I guess for me when I hire is, as many panels as there are about being data-driven, as much conversation as there are about being data-driven, I come across few companies who sort of walk the walk, and I come across very few professionals who, while, proclaiming that they're data-driven, are like, of course, yes, the data, actually act on that, and kind of going back to what you were saying about it's sort of conflicting with the brand, like when it comes down to brass tacks, and the data says one thing and that sort of goes against your intuition, are you going to listen? And so when I am hiring people or when we're training people, the thing that I am looking for outside of hiring a great data scientist, which is obviously, difficult but a huge advantage, is if we have good data and we are putting it in front of you, are you going to make your decisions based on it? I mean, and I don't know if that sounds obvious to folks, but I mean, I just come across people all the time who just don't go for it. They just don't have true faith in data. So like, I truly believe in data. I've seen it work. I truly believe in it. And if you're telling me, this is the answer, and even if it looks funky to me, I'm going to go with it. And some people, so I'm looking to hire people who have faith and who believe.
Yep.
But would you change your whole brand approach? And would you, strip your whole product landing page? Would you do like all the things?
I mean,
because at some point then it's like, oh, everyone go just copy and paste Amazon, which is from like, they've tested the things.
Yeah.
So how do you?
I don't think that if Betabrand, I think if you guys went and copied Amazon's product page and all that stuff, I don't think it would work for you, because obviously, something about your brand has resonated to this point. You guys got where you got to. There's something in that aesthetic that is there. Once that foundation of that brand exists, then yeah, I'm gonna let the audience tell me where to take it from. I mean, I'm not saying completely, abandon who you think you are, but I generally find that the departures that the data is sort of asking you to make from your brand seem larger to you than they actually do to your audience, and maybe that they're sort of pushing you in the right direction, and they're still sort of seeing you through a certain lens that maybe is truer to what you guys feel like is home base. Then you're like, yeah, but this isn't us. But I mean, I think it is. So I mean, I would say that the audience will take you to the right place.
So what are some of the challenges that you guys are facing? So you're all sitting here saying we have a testing-centric culture, we have the platform, we're working on the platform, is putting those in place. What is like the biggest challenge that you're trying to solve come holidays, come next year? It looks like a lot.
For me, I'd say resources and focus. I think, again, for all fast-growing businesses, what do you say no to? That's a really tough question. We want to do all of it, and we want to do it all really well, and we cannot. So with limited time, energy, and resources, what are the 3 things that we're going to commit to and we're really going to tackle? And what's the noise that we're going to get away that, we all get pitched 97 times a day from service providers that are going to increase our revenue by 10%. Like, that's not really going to happen. So how do you get through the noise and then really tackle the things that you're confident in, your company's going to really rally behind, and no one's going to say, well, what if we did X, Y, or Z? Just really drive forward.
I think the biggest challenge in media right now is kind of what you touched on a little bit earlier, which is like short-term decision making based on what data might tell you might be best for today, and making sure you're not ignoring data on that's counterfactual to what is good for today, that what's going to help me in a month, it's going to help me in a year, Are we like overdoing it on, the quick hit and seeing the immediate returns at the behest of the damage we're doing long term to our brand and things like that? So I think that those are the decisions when you're in a newsroom, on a daily basis, and you say to yourself, like, this news is hitting. It's probably not for us usually, and I work for a media company that has broadened out a lot over the last year or so, but you see stories and that's easy traffic, we could go grab that, but we've also seen what happens when we do too much of that. It's like potato chips, kind of like you munch on them, the immediate reaction is great, the long-term consequences are big. I think that's where the challenge for data in newsrooms right now is getting a complete view and not just something that's just an echo chamber that causes you to make bad decisions.
Yeah. Rob, I think one of the conversations that we had yesterday as well was David, again from Ecumen, he talked about how their usual testing cycles were 7 days and maximum, maybe even less sometimes. And that with their transition towards retention, they extended the testing cycles to 30 days, 60, 90 days, trying to have longitudinal cohort testing infrastructures in place. Obviously, that's a lot harder. The math is harder, which we've heard. Do you agree? Is that something kind of like, how does your testing culture actually look like in action?
Yep. So I think, again, because we're a subscription service, we sometimes need a longer cycle to do some testing. So a good example is we're doing some price testing right now, where right now if you buy a 1, 3, 6, or 12-month plan at Barkbox.com, you can...
What was that website again?
It's Barkbox.com. Thank you so much. It's all prepay. So you get a pretty hefty discount if you wind up buying a 12-month plan and you're willing to pay up front. But what we found, one thing we found from watching that cycle is credit card can go stale over the course of 12 months. Your decline rates are much higher, and you wind up having to work much harder to win those guys back. And so we're doing some price testing where we'll say, we'll lock in that rate. We'll charge you the $19 a month that it kind of works out to, and we'll just do that once per month instead of all up front. We're not going to know what the results are of that specific test until a year later.
Right.
And we'll watch decline rates over the course of those 12 months, and we'll see how things work out. But we need the flexibility to test that with a small portion of our audience. Again, it's kind of our regular control.
Yeah.
And I have a question on that. Are you seeing third-party data starting to come in? Could you ask somebody else, like, we have a similar business model as these companies. Do you know if they've done that kind of thing? Because that's one thing we're starting to look at now, too, is third-party data a lot, trying to overlay that over ours.
Yeah. So, we don't necessarily have spreadsheets of third-party data from other subscription services, but we'll talk to lots of other people in the industry and understand what people are doing. So there's some subscription services that their model is free trial right off the bat, and then they play the retention game. And they put all their effort into retention. Acquisition is not as challenging when you're giving away your product. And then there's some guys that just bill monthly that we talk to and we try and understand the economics. There's some guys that allow you to skip a month or to pause your subscription and then come back later. And so we've talked with folks and we've understood some of the pros and also some of the pitfalls of what that does. So you're always kind of looking at what other people are doing, but then when you have enough volume, you're able to do a 2-3% test on your inbound traffic and actually get pretty meaningful data usually pretty quickly.
Adam, how about you? 7 days, good enough?
Yeah, it's definitely we have all sorts of different time cohorts that we're using. The main thing that we try to do, sort of going back to what you were asking about lifetime value, is almost never are we backing into this is just the lifetime value, or how do we increase lifetime value on the site. Always, we're trying to do two things. We're trying to break down a KPI like lifetime value or retention rate into 4 to 10 parts, basically. So instead of saying, let's try to increase our retention rate by pulling on this lever with email, right? We'll say, let's try to increase our retention rate 7 days after somebody has made a purchase with this one email, all right? Just our 7-day retention rate. How many people do we repeat after the first week? And what that does is it allows us to sort of get a micro view on the data, and also on the lever that we're pulling on so that we can sort of see our actions show up in the data more clearly when we're saying, all right, let's look at a 7-day retention rate, a 1-month retention rate, a 2-month retention rate. And we do the sort of same type of things where we're cohorting and segmenting, pretty much across the board so that we make it a little bit easier on us. So we're getting data right away, but we may not see sort of like the entire cycle complete for 3 months.
Yep. Something else that I always talk about and that we hear a lot from our clients is, coming in and saying, oh, our open rates this month look terrible. Obviously you blame the vendor because that's what you do. And then we go back and we're like, wait, but what happened? Like, who are these users? Like, who did you acquire? Like, what was your acquisition strategy like? And oftentimes I think the email and the retention team somewhat is disjointed from the acquisition team and doesn't necessarily know who is actually coming into the door, so that this conversation actually can be conclusive with the various teams. Is that how do you feel like how are acquisition and retention teams working together at your companies? Are they, does everyone know what each department is currently testing and how they're impacting each other?
I mean, mine is the same team, and I would highly recommend that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're pretty similar. We actually had this happen in real life last week. We did a partnership with any gamers here, Counter-Strike Go game anyway. So they have the ability to send gobs and gobs and gobs of traffic, and a lot of it international. So we, you forget what happened yesterday. So we went out and sent like the first welcome cycle for this group, and half the open rate that it used to. It turns out 18-year-old Poland kids aren't as interested in our clothes as others may be. But you have to remind yourself, well, what is that traffic? And then we actually did know that we would expect less. I guess, real-time impact from that, but it's a longer-term play. But being clear on how they work together, totally agree, it's the same team, that they can understand, well, here's the traffic I'm looking to acquire, so they should behave very similar to this, or actually this group where it's a test from acquisition, so they should behave, a little differently. So I think it's key to understand that, because then as you're thinking through your overall return on ad spend or effectiveness, you have to look at and understand the entire picture, and if you start chasing multiple audiences that don't behave the same, it throws that all out the window. So the data, again, is the key component.
Looking ahead into next year, what are some of the things that you are excited about, particularly around the testing sphere and kind of like your efforts there? Any kind of like vendors, any tests that you have planned that you are excited about launching? Kind of like what is there to come in the next year that you guys are focused and excited about?
Well, I mean, we're starting to see, I referenced instant articles earlier. Snapchat has Discover, Twitter has Moments, there's Apple News, Google has AMP. So in the publishing world, I think, like traffic, hits, monthly unique users, all that stuff's going to be very different. We're going to start hearing people talking much more broadly about audience, this kind of fragmented audience across multiple different platforms and spaces, and figuring out how to measure that and advertise against it is going to be, I think, a pretty big data challenge that I'm glad that I don't have to deal with. But yeah, I think going forward, and BuzzFeed's been a big one. They claim that they get a quarter of their audience from Snapchat now. And that's kind of like where we're headed, like this overall audience. So that's going to be a weird one.
Yeah. Rob, anything you want to share?
Yes. A lot of challenges ahead. I think for us, we're kind of in the process of really ramping up our efforts around our e-commerce retail property called BarkShop, available at barkshop.com. And so for us, it's a challenge in that we're really looking to diversify away from just our current audience of people who get a subscription or have purchased a subscription or received a gift, getting more into like how do we actually create our own products. We're producing our own lines of treats and toys now. We rolled out a toy called the Dog Nold a few weeks ago.
Where could I find that?
What's that now?
Where could I find that?
I don't know. Just Google it. But performed really well, and so we're starting to take a look more at like how do we create our own products, given all of the data that we've collected around what people like and what their dogs like, etc. So excited to tackle that opportunity. Cool.
So what is the one piece of advice? So if I'm a struggling, not struggling, but I'm thriving towards.
Are you all right?
I'm thriving to have a more data-driven business, having more testing-centric culture as a CMO or as a marketer. What's the advice that you would give someone who wants to get started tomorrow and make really that change within the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it has to be that you can't rely exclusively on third-party tools. You need third-party tools to help you understand your data. You need an ESP. You need sail-through.
I did not pay him.
I'm a
for
company
this.
man. But what I would say is, I mean, and I'm especially, if you're e-commerce, but even if you're publishing, like we're all on the internet, right? And if you are not like trying to harness the power of the internet, and one of the things that is powerful about the internet is data, and you're not trying to do that internally, you're not trying to build data into your internal software, then you are sort of missing a core competency within your organization. You're missing a possible competitive advantage that somebody else can take, which is that we're not going to just stick somebody else's pixel on our site and they're going to feed us out, like some nice charts and graphs that make us feel like we're data-driven. We are going to take this in-house and we are going to build the tools that are custom to our business, that are really going to give us the answers that we need. We all know this stuff is hard, right? It doesn't all like fit into a nice, neat box where somebody's software company can just say, here, you're the god of your data, like this is all the stuff that you need. Like it just doesn't work that way, and I've tried them all. So my main advice would be, sit down with your dev team, sit down with a data scientist and say, how do we build this for ourselves and our unique value proposition so that the data is flowing first-party data from our database from day one, we have an infrastructure, and then we can get third-party tools on top of that maybe help us visualize that data a little bit more, but we really own our stuff.
How about you?
Yeah, I think to reiterate some of what Adam's saying, I think the first step is setting that baseline. You have to have your reporting tools in place. You have to have confidence in your data, because it's really hard to do anything else until you feel really confident that what you're looking at is accurate and that it has a meaningful impact on your business. So, you have to, everyone's at a different stage here in the audience, but like you have to get your internal reporting. You need to get Google Analytics up and running, or Mixpanel, or Chartbeat, or whatever you're using, and give everyone access, encourage them to use and participate with this data you have available. And then on top of that, you start to iterate once things are in place, but otherwise, you're just kind of flailing around.
Yeah. Anything?
Yeah, I'd say I'm excited about, more consumers wanting to have true, relationships with the brands that they support with their wallets and want to be participatory in that process. So hopefully that makes, the ad platforms more intelligent and thoughtful of how they do that. Just to pick on the statement, let's get away from, how do we be as annoying as possible without turning someone away, paraphrasing, of course. And then from a brand, allow us to think more intelligently around, what is a message I can send you that you actually care about? That I'm not just trying to get you to open just please one more email, please one more ad, So I think, as those two come together, I believe it, really has the opportunity to make all users feel a little more engaged with the folks that they're buying from. And it makes us step our game up as ad platforms are more intelligent. It makes ad platforms step their game up as brands are actually driving things more from a smarter data approach. So I think it goes on to make the world a better place.
Yeah.
I think for us at Mashable, a reasonable amount of transparency, not ultra transparent, but a reasonable amount of transparency around the data we generate. I think we're kind of known for our pages having those share counts on them, so you kind of see what has really popped. Internally, that's pretty true as well. We know what's doing well. We know what our audience is responding to. We know what they're not responding to.
Yep.
It's not the end of the world if you write something good that doesn't go huge. I mean, that's life, as every journalist will tell you. But being able to kind of understand and see the rhythms of how your operation is working it kind of makes everybody kind of understand the mission better, and it creates at least in our newsroom a pretty unified idea of where we're headed and what's working for us and what we can do more.
Great. I think we have a couple of minutes left. Do we have any questions in the audience? Anyone wants to, or even just a comment? Yeah.
I was just pointing at Aaron, because I'm a big fan of Betabrand.com, and I'm excited for the red eye sweater. Can that come out yet? Because I flew a red eye, and I could really use it. But I know you guys are big on testing, and I know you test everything from where users are looking at the models, from the women looking at the butt and men looking at the thighs. How are you bringing that back into the email program and really linking every part of your marketing strategy?
Yeah, thank you. It's a great question. Would you say your name was Katie? No, actually, thanks for the reminder. I think going back to what we test, and being online, we have the luxury of testing all sorts of things, from images people click on, calls to action, all the things that go along with it. And some examples I was given previously were, we'll test on, when we tested, if we're selling a men's shirt, we tested the model with various beard lengths. From clean shave to mustache to regular beard to like this giant monstrosity of a beard. And the funny thing, it was all done through Photoshop except for the guy's natural beard, and his lost. He came in last place versus all the other. So that was kind of humbling for him. But then we'll take that all the way through to, like, if we're selling pants. The example we wrote a bit about called crotch commerce. What we find is, like, men, if you're selling men's pants, the ad image that gets people to convert more, it isn't the handsome guy leaning up against a car, it's a literal close-up of thigh to waist. And for whatever reason, that's what guys tend to click on more and convert for. For women, it's the hamstring to the waist. So forget about all the beach lifestyle, it's very close-up of those things. So what we actually do then is we take these images and how do we fold these into the site so that when I click through, I don't necessarily see same picture, but there's a continuation of that. And how do we fold that into the email? We know it's converting out in the ad space. So how do we get that into the email so that we have a pretty good belief that people are clicking through that on the email, or even when you come to our site, that lightbox experience to capture an email. We're using a lot of those learnings. So what was clicked on out in the wild, what we'll call it, and then when they get to the site, how do you have a similar experience? So taking the data from the advertising efforts that we do, and then how do we sort of replicate that as good as possible, or as closely as possible to landing page or email capture, all those things. So funneling that in to each user as they came through, what was the ad they clicked through. So then now we have a cohort of people that we know that we brought them in and we can speak more intelligently to them, more relevantly, I guess, based on the type of stuff that they're interested in. So daisy chaining all those pieces together, hopefully you have a smarter, more well-rounded experience that gets people to stay more loyal longer.
That sounds like a fancy way to just say, show people's crotch more.
With dogs, I guess.
Dogs and crotches.
.com.
Dogs, someone buy that domain immediately.